Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. We want to welcome you to the historic 12th Baptist Church. My name is Reverend Willie Bodrick II. I serve as senior pastor of this great congregation, and we want to welcome you to tonight's Fireside Chat. We are so thankful for all of you who have joined us on Facebook Live and YouTube Live, and we hope that you are excited for this conversation that we're going to have tonight. Now, family, we have experienced a very difficult time in this country. We've been going through a pandemic that has taken the lives of some 465,000 and has continued to cripple families and communities and even our world. There's so many who are sick, so many who have had to bereave. Our institutions have had to reorient themselves and reimagine themselves anew. And still in this season, we brought from 2020 into this year, this pandemic. Now, what we're trying to do here at 12th Baptist Church tonight is to not only inform you, but empower you. And we want to talk about the fact that we've been praying all year for things to change, and now there is a COVID-19 vaccine. Now, we recognize this vaccine has been a very controversial topic. There are those who are skeptical right now, who have anxieties, who are worried, and rightfully so. There have been disparities in our healthcare system, and we've had a history of distrust of our healthcare system for just cause. But tonight, we also want to ensure that we are addressing the misinformation. There are those in our body who have already been vaccinated and who are going to be vaccinated. And then there are those who have questions, not only in our congregation or in our community, but all across the country. And so we welcome you on this night to have this conversation with us. We ask that if you have any questions tonight, that you join us and that you go to tbcbostonlive@gmail.com and you send those questions, and we will try to make sure we address them. Tonight, we have a very special guest who's going to be with us, and we will get to talk to him and get to know him, Dr. Akusobi, and we are excited that we're able to create this space. Fireside Chat is all about ensuring that we address the issues that are facing our congregation, our community, our country, and this world. And so without further ado, we are going to get started tonight, and we are going to open up in prayer. So let us bow. Most gracious and wise God, we come to you on this day just to say thank you. Thank you for life, thank you for health, and thank you for strength. Oh God, you know what we've been experiencing in this country. And God, you know the opportunity that has now arisen with the COVID-19 vaccine. And so God, no matter where we are as we are watching this particular broadcast, no matter where we fall on the spectrum of whether we are going to take it or not, God, our prayer is that you be in our midst. Allow for us to open our hearts, open our minds, and open our ears so we might receive the information that you have for us. And so, God, we pray that we are informed and empowered in this night. God, I lift up a special prayer for those who are still battling this virus and those who are mourning due to bereavement. But God, we still believe that there is a healer named Jesus, and there's still a balm in Gilead. And so because of that, we claim Christ over COVID, but we will do this informed, collective, and in community. So we thank you for our guest today. We thank you for 12th Baptist Church, and we thank you for our time together. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Let every heart and mind say amen. Amen. Welcome, Doc. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
So it's good to have you here today. We're thankful for you being with us here at 12th Baptist Church. Our audience across the country is thankful for you being here. Let's first start with just getting to know you. Let us know. Tell us about yourself. How did you end up here in Boston? How did you end up doing the work that you're doing? And give us some more about who you are.
Yeah, so I was actually born in Nigeria and came over to the United States at the age of 2 with my parents. And my parents came over to the U.S. really for the same reason that lots of families come over to the U.S., and that was to provide a better opportunity for their young family. And so when my parents came here, we actually settled down in the Bronx, and they were studying to become nurses. And so I grew up in a household surrounded by nursing books and medical books, and I was fascinated by that. I would flip through the pages and look at sort of beautiful images of the human body, and I think that's what really piqued my interest in medicine. Also coming from West Africa, infectious diseases is one of the main killers of people in that region of the world. And so medicine was always baked into my childhood, and that was what started my initial interest in the field. And I was also always a naturally curious kid. So I was like experimenting all the time, playing in the dirt, trying to learn more about the world. And so by the time that I got into undergrad, I went to Yale for undergrad, I realized that studying science was the best, most fun, most interesting thing I can do. And not only that, it was a way for me to actually do work that actually could impact and make a difference to the lives of my friends and family back in Nigeria by doing research into infectious diseases. So all in undergrad, I was pre-med, studying to become a doctor, but I also loved science, so I was doing research. And by the time I graduated, I was set on applying to MD, PhD programs. So that is to become a doctor via the MD and also a scientist via the PhD. Went to Cambridge for a year, studied biochemistry at the University of Cambridge in the UK, got a master's in that, and then came back to the US and started my MD, PhD program at Harvard Med, where I've been basically studying to become a medical doctor. And then I completed my PhD last year in infectious diseases. I was studying tuberculosis. And that was back in 2020. And so now I am completing my medical school journey, and then we'll be applying to residency programs to be an internal medicine doctor and hopefully an infectious disease doctor next year.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you for all the wisdom that you bring, and we're thankful you've had your travails from New Haven, and now you're here, and we're excited, and we're praying for you as you go through this journey. So let's talk about it. Let's unpack this. We've faced a pandemic. From a pastoral perspective, this has been, a very, very, very difficult season. Ministering to people who have had to either deal with this virus, congregants, community persons, being with families who have lost a loved one and have had to mourn differently. And this isn't just, an issue that we're facing in Boston, but this is a global issue, right? People all across the country, people watching us all across the country are having to deal with the ramifications. And to dig a little deeper, we know that there's been a disproportionate effect on Black and brown communities. What I always say is that there were already pre-existing conditions, right, in our communities, and COVID just kind of snatched the Band-Aid off of that and further exposed that. And so here we are. 2021. At the beginning we thought that we would be out of this by what it said, spring, and then it was Easter first, and then fall, and then all of a sudden, we come into a brand new year, and we are here. And so we get to this particular place. Could you kind of talk about what COVID is, right, and give us a little understanding about how this is affecting our communities, and then we get news that we have a virus vaccine. There's a possible solution to our problem. And so if you can just talk about what COVID is, and then how does this vaccine work? Like what are we talking about? Unpack that for us, please.
I echo everything that you said about the virus and this pandemic having a disproportionate impact on our communities. Both my parents are nurses in New York. My sister's a nurse in New York. They work in nursing homes. They're Black. They work in predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. And the experience they had early on in the epidemic in New York, which in the beginning was the epicenter, was just devastating. Both my parents had COVID as well. And so I've had a personal sort of window into the way that this virus can impact your family, can impact your community. So starting with the basics, COVID-19 is a disease that's caused by a virus called SARS-CoV-2 that originated in Wuhan province in China. And this is a respiratory virus, so it spreads via air droplets, and it's airborne, and so it's very infectious. And that's why this virus was able to spread from that province in China to eventually becoming a worldwide pandemic, impacting every single country on the world. And so understanding that this is a highly contagious virus that's also deadly, You know, if you're older, if you have pre-existing conditions like heart disease, diabetes, obesity, lung disease, you're at an increased risk of actually having serious outcomes from this virus, including death. And so it's something that we should take seriously. And within the Black community and within communities of color here in the United States, we know that centuries of institutional racism has impacted these communities in such a way that our communities have higher rates of certain diseases that can disproportionately make COVID harder to deal with. Not to talk about housing and jobs discrimination. It's such that you have people who are working in industries where they're more likely to contract the virus. And so there's a lot of things that you mentioned that could compound the deadliness of this virus into our communities. And so now in 2021, we have a vaccine, right? And vaccines historically have been the best way, the number one tool that medicine has to actually combat a pandemic and combat viruses and other pathogens. This is our way out. And so I'm glad that we have vaccines, because this is the surefire way that we can ensure the safety of ourselves and also our community going forward. And so to answer the second part of your question, what is the vaccine, right? This is the million-dollar question. So in the United States, we have 2 companies that have vaccines that have been emergency use authorized for use here. And those are the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And vaccines in general are products that we use to prevent yourself from getting a disease if you were to be exposed by it. And so we are routinely vaccinated against lots of diseases in childhood that we no longer see. Vaccines work. And how do the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines work? They use this molecule called mRNA, and mRNA is a genetic material that tells our cells to make proteins. And so these vaccines have this mRNA molecule that tells our cells to make a protein that's found on the surface of this virus. That's called the spike protein. And the COVID-19 virus uses this spike protein to infect our cells. And so with these vaccines, we're instructing our cells to make this spike protein such that our immune systems can recognize it. And it recognizes this spike protein as foreign, and it makes antibodies against it. And these antibodies are what give us protection against COVID. And so when you get vaccinated, your body starts producing these viral proteins that the immune system recognizes as foreign. It produces antibodies, and then you get protected against COVID, such that if you were to experience it, if you were to encounter it or be infected with COVID, your body has already seen a protein from this virus and is able to better fight it off. And so the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines that have come out are 95% effective compared to placebo, so compared to just control that is not the vaccine. They're 95% effective of preventing serious COVID-19 disease. And so this is really a medical triumph, and is now being, so people all across the United States are now being vaccinated. And the medical community is pretty hopeful that if we can continue with this vaccination rates that we have now, we can go back to some sense of normal pre-pandemic.
Yeah. Well, thank you for laying out the science and kind of helping us unpack this. One of the things that we're trying to fight is misinformation. One of the things I've told our congregation is that I'm not trying to make you make a decision. I don't want to force you into the decision, but I want you to be informed. There's a lot of information flowing around, much due to, I would say, side effects, right? Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about just like, what are the side effects? What's common, what's not common or common? What are the things that people can expect? Because it seems that, because there are side effects, there has been a disincentive to desire the vaccine. Right. And so could you just talk about that just within the scope of medicine and how we can better understand that as lay people?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. And I actually received the Moderna vaccine dose 1 and dose 2. So I can talk about the side effects in general, and then I can tell everyone about my actual unique experience.
That'd be great.
So if you get the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, the types of side effects that you can expect to see is sort of soreness in your arms, right? If you get injected with a shot, you're most likely going to feel sore in that arm. Yeah. That's to be expected. Other side effects that people feel: fatigue, fevers, night sweats, body aches. These are side effects that go away, importantly, in 24 to 36 hours. They're not permanent. They're what we call self-limiting. So you have them and then they go away. And not everyone actually gets these side effects. It really is a spectrum in terms of what you experience. Yeah. But the important part is these side effects go away. And in actuality, when you have these side effects, it's actually a sign that your immune system is working. So when you get the spike protein being produced in your body and the immune system recognizes it as foreign, it produces an immune response. And that immune response that your body is building is actually the fever, the fatigue, the body sweats, the body aches. That is what you're experiencing. And then it goes away. Gotcha. So when I got the first dose, February 1st, it was the Moderna vaccine. And the only side effect I really felt was soreness in my arm. That lasted for about 12 to 24 hours, and then it went away. When I got the second dose, 4 weeks later, I actually felt no side effects. Not a single thing. I had a little bit of soreness in my arm, but didn't feel fatigued. I didn't have a fever. I didn't have any muscle aches. My parents, my mom, who had to take some convincing to get the vaccine, but she eventually did. She had a little bit of a headache. She had a fever. She took a Tylenol and was fine the next day. And so there's really wide spectrum when it comes to the side effects that people feel. But the important thing is, of the over now 35, 40 million people that have been vaccinated thus far in America, the rates of severe side effects is vanishingly low. Most people experience what I talked about earlier for less than 36 hours, and it goes away.
So side effects could happen, and we sort of get to know what those are. You know, that soreness of arm. Yeah. It reminds you a little bit of like the flu shot.
Exactly,
so to speak, that we're encouraged to take every year, which we are very comfortable with. I think, you know, because of that, because there are responses, you know, people are different, right? You know, you're going to respond to this different than I'm going to respond to it. And so because there have been some responses that have caused some fear, so to speak, people are worried about it being safe.
Yeah.
You've taken it. Yeah. First Lady Bodrick has already gotten hers. There are others in our congregation. And one of the things I don't want us to do, because I've seen this, is that there's been a shaming of people who have questions. Yeah. There's been a stigma. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit just to the safety of this, and just how do we have a conversation and create dialogue to create space for questions like we're trying to do tonight, but also to actually, you know, talk about the facts so that we can be reassured with whatever decision we make.
Yeah. As someone in the medical community, my number one thing is our job is not to tell people to take the vaccine like you were alluding to earlier. Our job is really to inform people with the information, with the facts, with what the science is, so that when you have that information, you can be empowered to make the decision for yourself. Better that you are empowered with real knowledge than with misinformation that gets you to actually make a decision that's not based in real information. Yeah. And that is what we don't want to see. And so when it comes to sort of the safety of the vaccine, I would rather people come with real questions and for us to provide a space where people can feel like they won't be judged, because that's the only way we're actually going to make any headway in terms of tackling distrust and in terms of actually feeling equipped with knowledge to make a decision for you and your family. Yeah. Talking from personal experience, my parents are both healthcare professionals. They've been nurses for over 25 years in this country. And yet when the vaccines came out, my mom was the first person to say, no, not me. I'm not taking it. Chidi, how am I supposed to know it's safe? It came out so quickly, right? Yeah. And this is my mom, a healthcare professional, who's been giving people vaccines here for 20 plus years. Yeah. And so she, obviously with me, felt comfortable to voice those concerns. Yeah. And we had conversations for over 2 months about the vaccine, and she eventually took it. And so it's important to create the space for people to ask questions. And what I told her is that the vaccine is safe, and here's why. The vaccine went through phase 1 clinical trials. So that's in phase 1 clinical trials, pharmaceutical companies and researchers are asking the question, is the vaccine safe? They're not even asking the question, does it work? They just want to ask, is it safe if you give it to healthy volunteers? Yeah. And then in phase 2, they ask the question, is it safe? And at what dose should we give it for it to be effective? That's phase 2 clinical trials. And then you do phase 3 clinical trials. These phase 3 clinical trials had over 30,000 people, right? And in phase 3 clinical trials, you ask the question, is this vaccine safe? But also, does it work? And it turns out that these vaccines were over 95% effective. So not only were they safe, but they also worked exquisitely well. For comparison, the flu vaccine is only 40 to 60% effective. Wow. And the FDA actually had their threshold of being able to approve a vaccine at 50%, right? So these vaccines were over 90% effective. So they really hit the ball out the park. And then after phase 3 clinical trials, you now have phase 4, or what's happening now, which is monitoring the safety once the vaccine is sort of doled out to the rest of the population. And trust that the CDC, the FDA, the world's regulatory agencies are looking at the millions and millions of people getting vaccinated now, and the overall conclusion is that the vaccine is safe. And so after having conversations with my parents, after they saw me take the vaccine and realized that I was totally fine, they felt more comfortable taking it. And so the conclusion is the vaccine is safe, but if you have any questions, that's okay, that it's allowed, and you ask, because you have every right to know what's in the vaccine and what you could expect to feel after getting it.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for that, because I think that's important to highlight, not only from the personal anecdotes of your own experiences and your family experiences, but also the science. It's Black History Month, right?
Yeah.
We call ourselves a historic 12th Baptist Church because we've been blessed since our mother church and the first African meeting house to be on the battlefield for the Lord for 215 years, and 180 years as 12th Baptist Church. And we are a church that prides ourselves on our history, our Black history, because we believe we are Black history, and we're still working each and every day. What resonates in the minds of people when they hear vaccine, when they hear this type of expedience, it's Tuskegee experiment, right? We got to talk about it, right? Or the disparities in health writ large. And so there is justified apprehension, right? And I think one of the things that I would kind of ask about when we think about these trials, yes, it's safe. I trust you. 95%, I thought that was a great fact to talk about the juxtaposition between these vaccines in relation to the flu, where the threshold is like 40 to 50%. That's something I'm learning new today. But beyond that, how do we know that the participants in the trials were reflective of the communities that were disproportionately affected? How do we know that there was diversity in these clinical trials, and did the participants look like me? Could you talk to that a little bit?
I love that question, and this is something that people very early on in the clinical trials were asking and pushing these pharmaceutical companies to really make sure that the people who were in the trials reflected the diversity in America. Because here's the thing, you could do a clinical trial, right? And if all the participants came from one community or from one race, you have a really hard job selling the vaccine or selling anything to another community. And so with the Pfizer, Moderna clinical trials, there's a really big push to make sure that these trials were reflective of America's diversity. And so I can talk about the percentages of the participants, right? And so in both Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, 20 to 25% of the participants were Hispanic or Latino. Wow. About 10 to 12% of the participants were African Americans, and about 5% of the participants were Asian Americans. And these percentages reflect the percentages of those racial ethnic groups in the country. And not only that, they then looked into the efficacy of the vaccine in each of those subgroups in addition to the entire population. And they found that the vaccine was just as effective in white, Black, brown, and Asian populations as it was with other groups. It was pretty comparable. And so that data was actually very reassuring. Yeah. It hasn't been as well publicized, and I want more medical professionals to actually say, not only is the vaccine effective, but look at who were in the clinical trials. It reflected America because there was a real push for people to do that. There's a shout out to the head scientist of the Moderna vaccine is a Black woman, Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett.
Beautiful.
Yep, and this was one of her things that she really pushed for, which was to have the Moderna trials actually include more Black Americans in them, because she knew that there was no way you can sell a vaccine to the Black community if the participants in a trial didn't have any Black people in it. Yeah. The trials were reflective of not only racial ethnic groups in the country, but also people with pre-existing conditions. So they had people with obesity, hypertension, diabetes.
That's good to know. Well, you started tonight getting that information out to our congregation, to our community, because I think it's important that we are reflected, right? And I know that it was hard to get people to even do that, but it's reassuring when we talk about the efficacy of this particular vaccine, that we know that people that represent our community were also a part of those trials, and it was tested in our community. I want to shift gears a little bit because I have friends who have the virus, family members within our family, people that we know in our congregation who have contracted the virus at some point, people in our community, people who represent our community, who throughout this pandemic who have contracted the virus. And now we have a vaccine. What do you say to the people who have COVID right now? Should they get the vaccine right now? Is it safe? What should they do if you have COVID? Is that an appropriate thing to continue to do if you're already dealing with the virus right now?
Yeah, so I can answer that question a couple ways.
Yeah.
Over 30 million people in the country have had COVID, right? And so there's a large number of people who've had COVID who now have to make the decision, do I get vaccinated? And the recommendation now is that yes, if you've had COVID, if you've recovered from COVID, you should still get vaccinated. And this is what the science is telling us. If you have COVID, your body produces antibodies. These are molecules that give you protection against the virus. The number or the level of antibodies that you get from a natural infection is actually lower than the number of antibodies you get from a vaccination. And so the thought is that if you get vaccinated against COVID, you actually have higher levels of protection, higher levels of antibodies against the virus than from a natural infection. And so the thought is that if you've recovered from COVID, you should still get vaccinated, because the natural immunity, we don't know how long that lasts. And not only that, the immunity that you get from vaccination is actually stronger. So that's one.
Yep.
Two, if you're recovering from COVID, I would say that you should wait till you're actually past the period in which you're actively infectious and in which you're actually feeling sick. And then from there, talk to your healthcare providers to see what is the adequate amount of time that you should wait after recovering from COVID and getting the vaccine. I think it's a great question, and it's something that it really would depend on a person-to-person basis based on what exactly their sort of health baseline is at.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. So if you got it, get it, because it will increase the antibodies in your body,
right.
And give you more defense against any type. Can you get it again?
Yeah, so there's some questions that you're going to be, no, this is good. There's some questions that you're going to be asking, which I love, because we're in a pandemic, right? And we are learning so much information about not only the virus, but also the vaccine response. And so right now, this is an area of active investigation, which is scientists are trying to figure out, if you get vaccinated, how likely are you to be infected again with COVID?
Gotcha.
And perhaps you can talk about it an hour later, but there are these new variants that are coming out.
Okay.
And you know that some variants.
You can jump ahead. Let's get to it.
Yeah.
Let's get into the meat of it.
Yeah. So there are a couple of variants out there that have now emerged. You guys may have heard of it in the news. There's the UK variant that's more infectious. There's a South Africa variant that's not only more infectious, but it also seems like it's a little better at evading the vaccines response. Meaning our vaccines now, the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, are not as effective. They still work, but they're not as effective in preventing you from getting the South Africa variant of COVID.
Gotcha.
And so when you ask the question, can you get it again? It actually depends on the virus, the variant that you may be exposed to. If you're exposed to the sort of run-of-the-mill regular COVID virus that's been out there, chances are you probably are protected against that virus. But if you are infected with the South Africa variant, then there's a chance that you may be reinfected. And that's why scientists are really, and public health officials are really trying to get people vaccinated as quickly as possible so that we can prevent the spread of these new variants that are coming out that may be a little better at evading our immune responses.
Wow, so we're in the midst of it. We're in the thick of it.
Yep.
Because I think my next question was really going to come towards what does it look like practically? Let's people are tired of being cooped up in the house. People have had to balance, hybrid school or virtual school and deal with their job, and their home space and workspaces have converged. We wear these in the sanctuary, or we wear gloves, and we're wearing masks everywhere we go. What does it look like pragmatically? Is it okay once you're vaccinated to no longer wear your mask? Do you still need to wear your mask? What does that look like as a practice? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, I love this question, because once you get vaccinated, people want to know, okay, how does this actually change my life?
Yep.
What are some of the things that I'm now going to be able to do now that I've been vaccinated? And so here's what I'll say. One, if you get vaccinated, you actually still have to wear a mask.
Okay.
And here's why. We don't know whether or not getting vaccinated prevents you from actually transmitting the virus asymptomatically, which means we know that getting vaccinated prevents you from getting severe COVID disease, meaning it's going to prevent you from getting hospitalized, from having the severe symptoms of COVID. But there's still a chance that you may actually be asymptomatically infected. So you're infected, but you don't know, you feel totally fine, and you're still shedding, you're still infectious.
Wow.
And until we figure that out, the recommendation from public health officials is you still have to wear a mask.
Yeah.
Not only that, not everyone in society is vaccinated yet. And so until we get to a situation in which most people are vaccinated and we can be sure that the virus isn't around, the best way that we can protect ourselves, and also the cheapest, is to wear a mask and still do social distancing.
Yeah.
But rest assured that getting vaccinated means that you're preventing and protecting yourself from getting really sick from COVID and potentially having serious outcomes. And so it's still a benefit to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
But people still recommend you wear a mask, you still wash your hands, appropriately social distance, all of that. Hopefully by the spring, late or early summer, we have enough people vaccinated and enough of a robust public health response that we can start slowly returning to the way life was before. But until we reach that, the recommendation is still to keep on keeping on with the way things are.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's interesting you say that because now you were talking about those variants, and, the UK variant, the South African variant, and, it makes me realize that we need to keep our mask on, even if it's not for regular COVID, COVID diet, but, so there's some other, there's some other flavors
COVID,
out there that we don't want to experience. And so to our congregation, to everybody, look, we're going to keep our mask on. We're going to continue to stay safe, continue to stay socially distanced, continue to do this work. As we're thinking about this, and as we're thinking about, you talked about could you talk a little bit more about the herd immunity a little bit? Because I think, is that sort of what you mean by having a lot of people? Could you speak a little bit about that? I think that term got thrown around by Dr. Fauci, and then it became politicized. And I think, for persons who, they did a little bit of science, they may have started pre-med, but then didn't see the light to be a doctor.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about what does that mean? What are they saying to us when they say herd immunity? You put out a projection of the spring. I'm leaving projections alone.
Fair.
Not you. You know a little bit better than me, but I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable to say, when we get there, hopefully we'll get there, and we'll be able to celebrate and praise God and worship together again in person sooner or later. But let's talk about herd immunity. Give us what are they saying? What is the concept? What are we looking to achieve when you say that?
Yeah, so this concept of herd immunity is every microbiologist's favorite thing, because it's fundamentally how vaccines work.
Okay.
So when we are vaccinating people, we are essentially giving their bodies a chance to see an infection before they actually see the actual infection, right? You're priming their immune systems with a virus or with a bacteria and say, hey, this is something that you may see in the future. Develop an antibody response or develop an immune response such that if you see it out in the world, you actually are protected. Okay? And so when we're vaccinating people, we're allowing your body to get protection against a virus or against a bacteria. Now, if we start vaccinating enough people in the population, what ends up happening is that the virus or the bacteria that's spreading finds it is harder for it to spread because there are too many people who are immune to it. So it can bounce from person A, but person A is immune, so it doesn't go on to infect person A. Then it gets to person B, but person B is also immune, so it doesn't infect person B. And it goes on and on and on. But if enough people in the population are actually vaccinated, then it has no one to jump to and actually infect. And so what herd immunity is you can actually protect a population from an infectious organism if enough people in that population are actually immune, because there's no one for it to infect.
Gotcha.
And so the reason why we don't see children and young adults dying from diseases like smallpox, measles, mumps, and there are lots of other infections I can throw out is because we do a very good job of immunizing people early on, and immunizing enough people such that there's herd immunity. The society is protected against this virus or bacteria from spreading around. And so the goal for COVID is to get enough people in this country vaccinated such that COVID doesn't have anyone else to infect. And that is why we vaccinate. We want to vaccinate. It's not enough for you to be protected. We have to get as many people protected such that we can all get protection against an infectious organism.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So now we know. All right, now we know. We can participate when they're throwing the language around. Those are the questions I have. One of the things we want to do is to make sure we open this up for our congregation to talk about. We have questions that have come in to tbcbostonlive at gmail.com. So if you have questions even right now, we ask that you send them to tbcbostonlive at gmail.com, and we're going to try to get those questions in. We have Doc here with us for some more time. So I have a few questions that have already been queued up, and I'm going to ask them just so we can address these questions and make sure that we get these answers to our community. So person one says, I have hypertension, I have asthma, and my BMI is over 30. The question they ask are, what are the high-risk complications that I could potentially face if I choose not to take the vaccine and I contract COVID-19? So that was their first question. Their second question is, what is your most compelling argument supporting the reasons why I should take the vaccine? So you got those facts?
Yeah, let's go.
Let's go.
So I think this is a great question, because when people are watching the news or reading the news, there's this talk of COVID-19, but a lot of people actually don't know what is the COVID-19 disease? What can potentially happen if you get COVID? You know that there's shortness of breath, that like fever, chills, night sweats. Those are symptoms that I say are like part 1 COVID. If you get that, you're mostly fine. You feel a little sick, like the common cold. But COVID can get a lot worse. And this is what we call complications. And so, especially with someone who has like the diabetes and a hypertension, like this question, this person asking the question has, you can get some pretty serious complications. So you can get shortness of breath, which can come about because you have pneumonia, which is an infection of your lungs. And then you can actually get lung failure, something called acute respiratory distress syndrome. And that is when your lungs basically shut down, and that actually kills people. But before that happens, you can get mechanically intubated because you are no longer able to breathe for yourself. COVID has such ravaged your lungs that we need to use a machine to actually provide breaths and oxygen to you. So that's a complication that people receive and actually die from COVID. Other complications, you can have organ failure, so your kidneys can stop working, your heart can stop working, your GI tract can have really serious issues and stop working, GI tract being like your stomach and small intestines, okay? You can also get blood clots. So not only is COVID a disease of your lungs, it actually infects cells that line your blood vessels such that you can actually get lots of blood clots around your body that can lead to strokes and lead to organ failure, like I mentioned earlier. And then the most dreaded complication that we know is death. And so people actually die from COVID on a daily basis. Sometimes in this country, over 3,000 people a day were dying because they're suffering from these very, very serious complications. Now, you may not die from COVID, you may recover, but you may have long-lasting side effects of having had a COVID infection. And this is something that we also don't talk about. These people are called long haulers. So now, just because they recover from COVID doesn't mean that they went back to their baseline level of health. These people have fatigue, they have brain fog, so they're like confused. They're still able to, think okay, but there's a little bit of like confusion. They have fatigue, like I mentioned, they have fevers. They basically don't go back to their normal, to their baseline state of health. And that's not something that we would wish on anyone. So to answer her second question, compelling reasons to get vaccinated. I think the first part of my answer kind of explains the second one, which is you don't want to have those complications if you don't need to, because this is totally preventable now if you take necessary precautions and eventually get vaccinated. No need to potentially have to suffer from lung failure, kidney failure, heart failure, strokes. I think the second reason I would say to get vaccinated is to realize that in a pandemic, we live in a community context. We have friends and family that we interact with, and you might feel protected, but you're interacting with other people, and so you're protecting yourself is also protecting your loved ones and your family. And until we are all protected, until we are all vaccinated, none of us are really safe. And so for me, that's the reason I would say people should really get vaccinated. If they so choose, it's because you're protecting yourself, but you're also protecting the people that you interact with. And you don't want to be the reason why a loved one suffered a really bad outcome of COVID.
I've heard some heartbreaking stories, you know, how they've told us to not go to Thanksgiving or not go to Christmas or, you know, not have that Super Bowl, you know, gathering because you just never know, though you may be asymptomatic, somebody else might not. Right. And I think it's important that that if we don't do it for any other reason, we do it to protect our neighbor, right? I think that's a Christian tenet that we believe in, right? Loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. Exactly. So let's go to the next question. The question is, how many COVID vaccines approved by the FDA are on the market? So, you know, you've talked a little bit about Pfizer and Moderna. Could you talk if there are more that are happening? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so right now, Pfizer and Moderna are the only two companies that have vaccines that are authorized for use in the United States. Okay. And those two companies use the same technology. That's the mRNA, that molecule that tells our cells to produce this viral protein that we then build immunity to. Gotcha. Later on this month, Johnson & Johnson's vaccine is going to be reviewed by the FDA. And if that regulatory process goes well, then the United States will have now a third vaccine on the market for use. And what's nice about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is that it's a single dose. So for Pfizer and Moderna, it's a 2-dose vaccine where you have to wait either 21 or 28 days between the 2 doses. For Johnson & Johnson, it's a one-shot deal. You get it, and then you don't have to think about coming back again to get your second dose. And so that vaccine, people believe, should be on the market starting early March.
Early March. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit, sit right there for me for a second, because there have been these, I guess, incongruencies in narrative, you know, that if I'm not getting 2 shots, I'm not as protected. Could you talk about that? You know, how do we find comfort? Maybe if I got the Pfizer or if I get the Moderna, if you get Johnson & Johnson, are we all good? That's kind of what the question is. Are we all safe?
Yeah.
Is my Johnson & Johnson less than yours because not as many doses? Could you speak to that a little bit?
So like I said, the science is moving so quickly that it's really incumbent on people like me and other folks to really explain exactly what has been done from a scientific perspective so people can understand. And so these vaccines are actually all different technology. Pfizer and Moderna are one type of technology, it's the mRNA vaccines. The Johnson & Johnson uses a different technology. And so because of the different technologies, the trials were designed differently. For the mRNA vaccines, you need 2 doses in order to get the high levels of antibodies in order to get a response. The one dose from Pfizer and Moderna gives you some protection, but it's not really as optimal as until you really get the second dose.
Gotcha.
The Johnson & Johnson vaccines, because it's a slightly different technology, the 1 dose is actually enough to stimulate an antibody response that's high enough for protection. And so these 2 vaccines, they both give you protection against COVID-19. The Johnson & Johnson one, because it's a slightly different type of vaccine, you only requires 1 dose, but you're still going to be protected. I wouldn't think of it as less than or inferior. It's really just different. And the difference that I think really matters is for like healthcare professionals and public health officials in terms of how you distribute the vaccine. So for Pfizer and Moderna, those vaccines have to be distributed in ultra cold storage containers. And so it's really hard to transport things at negative 80 degrees Celsius. Whereas the Johnson & Johnson vaccine can be kept in like regular 4 degrees like fridge temperatures, and so it's a little bit easier for like hospitals and places like community centers to deal with. And so the differences there is what really like matters for institutions, but for people like you and I, like the vaccine you get is the vaccine that you get, and rest assured that they're being given because the government and health officials believe that you'll be protected adequately.
So it's less about it's not about an inequity of the efficacy, but more so just about the different technologies that provide for the type of vaccine that you will receive. So that's good to know, because that's been a question that has emerged, is am I getting something less than? And I think people need to have that reassurance, and I think having the clarity that that these are just 2 different technologies is helpful for us to kind of situate ourselves. I want to get more questions in because I know time is of the essence. So let's talk about it. You talked a little bit about the differences, that's helpful. And you let us know that there's not really an advantage or a disadvantage per se. Do you know, like, somebody asked, where did these trials take place? Like I mean, people want to know. It's kind of like your food, right?
Yeah. Where are they coming from?
Where did this food come from?
Yeah.
Does it magically appear in the stores? Like, you know, what is the source? Where was Moderna? Where was Pfizer? Where was Johnson & Johnson?
Yeah.
Where were these trials taking place in the United States? Yeah, could you talk more about that?
Yeah, so love this question because it's nitty gritty, but it's good to know.
It's granular.
Yeah, let's get into it. So the Pfizer vaccine, phase 3 clinical trials had over 30,000 people in it. Wow. And these people came from, I guess, 4 countries: United States, Brazil, Argentina, and South Africa. Okay. So that's where the Pfizer trials were done.
Gotcha.
The Moderna trials had over 30,000 people, all within the United States.
Okay.
And then finally, the Johnson & Johnson trials were done in the United States, were done in Brazil, and were done in South Africa.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah.
So look, you know, we have some context now for where these trials are taking place. Here we are. Another question: are the vaccines in China and the UK and other parts of the world the same as the vaccines that are here in the United States?
Yeah. So love that question because as time goes on, there are more and more vaccines that are coming from different countries. So the first thing I'll say is, the basic premise for how all these vaccines work is the same. And that is, this virus has a spike protein on it that allows it to infect our cells. Yeah. And so what these vaccines are doing is telling our immune system, hey, recognize this spike protein as different or foreign and produce antibodies against it to respond. Now, the way that these vaccines differ is how it introduces that spike protein to our bodies. So Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are based off mRNA technology, and so the way they work is that it uses genetic material that instructs our cells to produce a spike protein. So that's Pfizer and Moderna from the United States / Germany. Then you have the UK vaccine, which is like Oxford AstraZeneca, and also the Johnson & Johnson vaccine use this second technology, which is it takes that genetic material from the virus, the spike protein, and it's introduced into our cells via a viral vector. And so it's basically a modified virus that is extremely harmless, and it's what allows the genetic material to be introduced into our cells. Yeah. And then the China vaccine, Sinovac, is a different technology. Okay. The way that vaccine works is that it actually takes the COVID-19 virus and it inactivates it. So it makes it useless, it renders it useless. And then they introduce that inactivated, killed virus into our bodies, and then our immune system recognizes the spike proteins on those inactivated viruses as foreign. And so the premise is the same, introducing spike protein into our bodies, but how the introduction happens differs between those 3 vaccines.
Okay, but they're all effective.
But they're all effective. Right now, the Chinese vaccine is not authorized for use in the United States, and so that is not even something that people will be thinking about here.
Gotcha.
But the Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Moderna are all effective. Johnson & Johnson hasn't yet been authorized. That will most likely come end of February, early March.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's get to that next question. And I know there's some live questions coming in off of Facebook. I promise you, as long as we got time, we're going to get to these questions. We want to answer them all. Also, we just want to let people know if you use tbcbostonlive at gmail.com, if there are questions we don't get to, we're going to try to get to those questions. We're going to try to make sure you get a response, you get an answer, so that you are informed and you are empowered. The next question we have is, as an epidemiologist, knowing what you know about the virus, is COVID here to stay? That's a good question.
That's a scary question.
It said, in other words, will we have to get a COVID vaccination every year like the flu vaccine?
Yeah.
I think it's a great question.
That's a great, scary, very important, timely question. Okay, so I can't predict the future. No one can really predict the future. Yeah. But based on my scientific understanding of what a lot of people are saying is that unfortunately COVID is here to stay. It is a virus that has basically infected people in all countries of the world, and is still spreading like wildfire. And until the world is adequately protected against COVID, no one is really safe, right? Yeah. You know COVID started in Wuhan province in China, and in less than 4 months had spread to lots of countries. And so as long as there's active COVID infection somewhere, we're not actually out of the woods completely. Okay. So COVID is here to stay. Now, whether or not we get vaccinated every year, like the flu vaccine, really depends on the emergence of variants that are completely resistant to our vaccines. That can happen. If that does happen, these companies are ready, poised to go to produce new vaccines that we would then take in order to protect against the new strains of COVID coming out. Whether or not that's a yearly thing or something that happens every 10 years, we don't know at the moment. But the prediction is that COVID is here to stay and that variants will most likely come out that we'll need additional vaccines for. But right now, we're not at that stage yet.
Well, thank you for your honesty, because I think as we're parsing through this, people are also trying to look at, what does the world look like after this, right? There's some things that we experience that will leave scars, right? I said there's some scars on our society that will never be the same after this, right? And so I think that is a amazing question, and part of this is us having faith, right? Faith that hopefully God is continually moving in the midst, and even if we don't have an assurance as of yet of what is to come, we do have hope, right? And we have hope that God is still on our side. Let's get some more questions in. So someone said they were watching another credible church on a panel that they had about this particular topic. And there was a panelist that said that the one-dose vaccines are not in line with the clinical trials, which resulted in the two-dose vaccines. What are your thoughts on this as it relates to Johnson & Johnson? And we talked a little bit about this, but if you can unpack that. And then I think they said in the recent talk of having to get a third dose. I haven't heard that yet, but that's a new one. But you can tell me about it. If the vaccine, in response to the new variants and mutations of the virus, would there be a third dose necessary? So, I know you touched on this a little bit, but could you unpack this for this person?
So when it comes to these new variants that are coming out, research is now being done and now coming out to understand how effective these vaccines are against the variant from Britain and the variant from South Africa. And here's what we know so far. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines actually still work pretty well against the UK variant. So there's no need for an additional vaccine to protect against the UK variant that's now spreading in the United States. The South Africa variant, though, is a different story. That variant actually, the vaccines work a little bit less, like 6-fold less than the regular run-of-the-mill COVID. And so the question now is, do we need another vaccine that's more effective against the South Africa variant? The vaccines we now have are still effective, but just not as good. And so there's a chance that people get vaccinated, but then get reinfected with the South Africa variant. That is, again, an active area of research, but people are now thinking about designing or updating the vaccines to work better against the South Africa variant. And if that happens, then we would be getting a third dose of the vaccine at some point in the future to protect against that variant. But there's so many variables out there, which is like, is this variant spreading in the United States widely enough such that we need to get vaccinated? Do the vaccines we now have work well enough that we can keep with just a 2-dose regimen? We'll see. That's an active area of research. But I think public health officials right now are focused on getting as many people vaccinated against the main strain of COVID that we have, with the hope that it protects us enough against the UK variant, which it does, and then enough against the South Africa variant that we don't need to be thinking about a third dose at this moment.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Thank you. Thank you all for that question. So the next question asks, before I take the COVID-19 vaccine, is it possible to know what's in it? There's been memes, there have been videos about
microchips.
What's right, microchips, eggs. And so they want to know, can I know what's in the vaccine? And if my body will not have a reaction due to other medications that I may be allergic to or take. I might have certain medications. And so I think the first part is, what's in it? That's it. And then, so say I have another medication I'm on, which many people do have. What if it doesn't chime with that medication? What am I to do in that circumstance?
So I actually read the reports, the 50, 60-page reports that the companies put out detailing exactly what's in the vaccine and how the studies were conducted and who was in them and how effective it was. And rest assured that the first thing I did was actually looked at what's actually in the vaccine.
Yeah.
Because, you know, my mother, that would be the first question that she asked, right? Like, what are they putting inside me? So it's actually really simple what's in these vaccines.
Okay.
It's composed of 4 things. So the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines have the mRNA molecule. That's what gives the instructions. Those molecules are surrounded by lipids, basically oils, and that protects the mRNA molecule and also allows it to enter our cells.
Yep.
And then this oil droplet with mRNA is surrounded by what we call salts. And these salts basically stabilize this whole molecule such that it doesn't fall apart before it enters the body. And that's it. And so there are no natural preservatives, there's no added ingredients, there's no eggs, there are no microchips.
No microchips, okay.
People aren't trying to, listen in your conversations, none of that. It's the mRNA molecule, the genetic material, oils that surround it, and then salts that basically act as buffers to neutralize and to protect and stabilize the vaccine.
Okay, so we can dispel some of those rumors and some of the conspiracy theories that have emerged, that we're trying to make sure that people are making a reasonable decision for themselves. And it's hard when you have all of this coming at you, but as you let us know, that it's not complicated. It's something that is very simple to deal with. With something.
And then the person also asked, will I have interactions with medication?
Medicine.
It's a great question because lots of people are taking medications, right? We want to know if I take this vaccine and if I'm taking medications, will there be a reaction? And so right now, the recommendation is that if you have severe allergic reactions in life to things like, it's just a severe allergic reaction, especially to vaccines in the past, you want to let your healthcare providers know, you want to let the people who are administering the vaccine know, because there's an additional protocol that they could take to ensure that you're safe.
Gotcha.
But right now, I haven't seen any recommendations against taking the vaccine if you're on certain medications. But if you're concerned, you can always ask your healthcare providers and also look on the CDC website to see if your specific medication is something that you're worried about interacting with the vaccine. But thus far, the recommendation is that people take the vaccines on a whole host of medications that they are on.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to know. We have a few more questions, Doc. If you got a couple more
minutes,
I want to make sure I get
let's
these
talk.
in. So someone said it's more about the timeliness. So typical vaccines or medicines take like 5 to 8 years to go through trials and testing. Is there any harm in the long run, being that this was done with such expedience? Will there be any long run harms that will be attached because we're taking a virus that was, in some people's opinion, done too quickly or rushed through? So could you talk a little bit to that now?
Yeah, so one thing I'd like to dispel is that this vaccine was somehow rushed. These mRNA vaccines have been studied for over 30 years. The first time that people actually thought about using mRNA vaccines was in the mid-1990s by scientists in the University of Pennsylvania. And she and her collaborators spent decades taking this technology all the way up to what we have now, which is actually vaccines being used. So people shouldn't think that these vaccines came out in a year. They've actually been studied by people, by companies for decades, since the mid-90s. Now what happened is that COVID came out and the world's sort of governments and the world's scientific communities turned their entire attention into solving this problem. And so you had a lot of money coming in, you had a lot of resources, and there was an active pandemic. And so there was a lot of push. There was a huge push to actually get something out. And so because of that, the technology that already existed was hastened and expedited, but not in a way that was unsafe, because the phase 1, phase 2, phase clinical 3 trials were all done and not rushed. It just so happened that the pandemic hit with this technology finally being ready to be used for the first time. And so I would say that don't feel like this technology came out of nowhere just to solve this problem. Now, when it comes to long-term effects, that is an excellent question. It's something that the FDA and the CDC is monitoring. But the thought is that these vaccines, the mRNA comes in and it's rapidly degraded. Their body destroys it within a couple of days. And so there's no long-term effects of this mRNA or this vaccine being in your body that we would know of. And I know there's a lot of information out there.
Oh,
like
yeah.
people will turn into zombies.
Yeah, clear it up. Let's clear it up. We want to clear all this up tonight so people can come back and watch this again.
Right.
If they forgot something, they can watch it again.
Right.
They can go to our YouTube channel. They can go to Facebook page and hear this. So please clear this up tonight.
Yeah, so that's not going to happen.
Gotcha.
Right? This technology is not permanently altering your DNA. It's not even touching your DNA. It's nowhere near your DNA in your body. And not only that, mRNA molecules are rapidly destroyed, and so they don't even hang around for more than a week. The one thing I will say that people are trying to understand is how long is the immune response going to be? That's what the real question is. You're immune, you're protected against COVID, but for how long? We don't know that yet because these vaccines are just now being put out.
Yeah.
Some vaccines we take once in our lives and we no longer have to take a vaccine again. Other vaccines like the flu, we take every year. So we don't know where where COVID will land in that spectrum. Is it a one-time and you're done for life? Or is it a come back every couple of years?
Yeah.
So that is an active area of research.
Good. I hope it's one and done.
Yeah, me too.
But if not, we know we can project that there's possibility that that the scientists are still working through this material to help us better understand when this will give us more clarity.
Right.
I think that's the most important part. Thank you, Doc. Thank you. There's another question. It says, why should I take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that has a less protection rate? So could you talk about that? I'm still learning about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Let's get in the weeds because the Johnson & Johnson, it's so flat out, it's hard to compare Johnson & Johnson to Pfizer and to Moderna because those trials were designed differently and also were conducted at different points in the epidemic.
Gotcha.
Or in the pandemic. So Pfizer and Moderna were done middle to late of last year where these variants weren't out there. Whereas Johnson & Johnson were done when the South Africa variant was out there, the UK variant was out there, and those variants, especially the South Africa one, reduced the efficacy. Yeah. And so here's what we know about the Johnson & Johnson data that they've released thus far, but the full report hasn't been put out. The efficacy rate of Johnson & Johnson vaccine actually differed depending on the country where the trials were done. So in the United States, there's around 70% effective. In South Africa, it was much lower, in the 50s, and that's because South Africa had that variant that is a little bit resistant to the vaccines. Yeah. And so there's that difference. The Moderna and Pfizer trials were looking at people being protected from getting severe COVID-19, which is ended up being hospitalized. Yeah. Whereas the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was looking at people getting protected from mild to moderate COVID-19. So just feeling some symptoms and testing positive, but not actually being in a hospital. So because of that, their percentage is a little lower than the 95%, but they were looking for signs and symptoms that were much broader. So they were capturing more people. But if you actually look at severe COVID-19, Johnson & Johnson has around an 85% protection rate, which is actually pretty high and pretty good. Remembering that the FDA threshold was 50%. And so if you're getting 80, 85, 90, as a public health intervention, it's great.
That's great. Okay. So all of these vaccines are way beyond the threshold of what is expected. And many people are just trying to make sure they process through how do we better understand that. So thank you for that clarity. Another question came in and said, can a person be asymptomatic even if they have the vaccine? I think you talked a little about that.
So let's talk about it. They
may have just joined us. If you just joined us, we want to make sure we touch on your question. And if there's information that you still have, please reach out to us at tbcbostonlive@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us. You can go to tbcboston.org and reach out to the church. Go to our Join Us button and contact us. But we want to answer these questions and make sure we talk about it.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, we're still in a pandemic, and there's a lot of questions that scientists are asking and getting answers for. So this is a burning question, which is, if you get vaccinated, can you still transmit COVID? Because what this vaccine trials looked at was whether or not you're protected from getting COVID disease and actually being hospitalized and having severe complications. They didn't test whether or not people can still transmit the virus. And so what we know is that if you get vaccinated, you're protected against COVID, but the question of whether or not you can still transmit is still actively being researched.
Gotcha.
And so the recommendation now is just because you're vaccinated, you still have to wear your mask, you still have to protect, socially distance, and use the appropriate public health precautions, because you could still actually have COVID and just not feel any symptoms
Gotcha.
and be transmitting. And so that is research that people will be doing more work into, and will have a better answer in the future. But for now, act as if you're protected from COVID, but could still sort of transmit.
Gotcha. That's helpful. That's very helpful. The next question, I think we have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Then Doc, we're gonna let you get back to your work, because I know you got a busy day tomorrow. What do you recommend for people who want to take the vaccine but have several different allergies? So they have a lot of different allergies. What do you recommend for a person in that dynamic?
Yeah, so if you want to get the vaccine and you have these allergies, when you go to the vaccination site, they're going to ask you a couple of questions that are pretty standard, including whether or not you have any allergies, and especially whether or not you have allergies to, or have had allergic reactions to previous vaccinations. So you definitely want to bring that up to the nurse or to your healthcare provider or anyone that could be administering the vaccine, because if that is the case, they may want to watch you after you get the vaccine for a little longer. So right now, everyone who gets the vaccine, you have to wait for 15 minutes where you're observed to make sure that you don't have sort of any allergic reactions.
Gotcha.
But for people who have had a history of allergic reactions in the past, that number goes from 15 minutes to 30 minutes.
Gotcha.
So that would be the recommendation. You definitely want to tell people before you get vaccinated, and depending on what the allergies are, they may say, yes, you can get vaccinated, but we're going to watch you for 30 minutes instead of 15, just to make sure you're in the clear.
Okay. So if you have an allergy out there, please let somebody know.
Exactly.
I think that's the biggest piece that I get out of that if you have allergies, let someone know so they can take the proper precautions, and you can better protect yourself as well. I think we're getting down to almost the last question, and we're going to close it for tonight. But I want to let people know this conversation doesn't have to stop. We're going to continue to do this work. We're going to continue to utilize this Fireside Chat platform to have conversations that address our community, that address our congregation, that address our country and even the world. And I want to let people know this is ministry.
Yeah.
This is ministry. You're doing amazing work. So the last question I think someone brought forward, and if there are questions that we didn't get to, I promise you we'll get back to them next time. Do any of these vaccines contain the live coronavirus? Is how that was captured. I think I get what they're saying. Like, are they putting coronavirus into me? I think that's what they're asking. So I know you talked about the makeup of the vaccine, but let's clear this up.
Yes.
Are they injecting me with coronavirus?
Yes. This is why this forum is so important, because these are questions that lots of people have.
Yes.
Right? So we got to answer. The answer is no. No. There is no live COVID-19 virus in the vaccine.
There is no live COVID-19 virus in the vaccine. I think that is a very important point.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you finish, Doc. I just want to make sure we
So some vaccines out there use, not the COVID-19 vaccines, but just in general, one way to make vaccines is to take the virus or the bacteria and kill it, and then introduce it to people, right?
Gotcha.
Those vaccines are called inactivated vaccines. The COVID-19 vaccines that we have are not that class of vaccine. And so you can rest assured that there's no live virus. There's some vaccines some companies out there that are trying to make that type of vaccine. And actually the Chinese vaccine is a killed version of COVID-19.
Gotcha.
But what's so great about the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that we have here in the US is that they're not taking the virus at all. What they took is genetic material for one gene and one gene only.
Wow.
And then that gene tells our body to produce this one protein from the virus that then is recognized as the spike protein. And so that's what's so marvelous about that technology, is that you don't have to deal with the live virus. You don't even have to deal with many genes from the virus. It's one gene.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dr. Chidi Akusobi, we thank God for
Thank you.
on this day.
Thank you.
To our audience, come on, give God some praise in the comments. We thank God for this brother coming to share his knowledge and wisdom. We are in the face of this pandemic, and there's so much work that we still have to do. We at 12th Baptist Church have been blessed that we've been able to give over $250,000 to support not only our community, our neighbors, organizations, but those who've been deeply affected in this pandemic because of job insecurity, housing insecurity, shifting in their dynamics, in their livelihoods, in their family because of bereavement. And so we invite you to continue to help us bless others at this time. You can go to the giving link on tbcboston.org, and you can go to the Tithely application as well as PayPal and help support us as we do the gospel work in this season. I want to give a special shout out to my wife, Dr. Devin Cromartie Bodrick. I'm giving you a hand. I'm going to give you a round of applause and stand. I love her deeply, a colleague of Dr. Akusobi, but also we're thankful for her work on this particular effort and making sure we can bring this into fruition here at 12th Baptist Church. I want to thank God for our AV ministry, for Brother Burden and Brother Anthony Query for their work on helping us continue to do this platform called Fireside Chat. I want to thank our nurses ministry, Sister Gibbs, and all those who have helped to support Sister Bell and everyone on that team who helped us bring this to you. We will continue to have this conversation. I know there are more questions out there, but what we're going to do as a church is continue to be empowered, but also be informed. And we know that we have a responsibility because without knowledge and wisdom, the people do perish. And so we are going to continue to do our part to continue to remain safe in this season, to protect ourselves, to sanitize, to do everything we need to do. Wear your mask. And if you have been moved by this night, by this information, I just ask that you continue to support our ministries. You can join us every Sunday at 10:45 a.m. and we are worshiping here at TBC. You can join us on Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram Live. We ask that you follow our channel on YouTube. We would love to continue to be in community with you. Follow our page on Facebook. We're on Instagram and we're on Twitter. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Will Beamer. But we want to be in community with you at 12th Baptist Church. We are a church of love, light, and liberation, and we're looking to liberate all of God's people through the love of Jesus Christ. And so I'm going to let Dr. Akusobi give us any last words he has, and then we're going to close out in prayer for this night. Doc, if you have any last words for the people.
Yeah, first off, I want to say thank you, Reverend Bodrick, for inviting me here. I had a great time talking to you and also doing the little that I can to inform the community out there about the dangers of COVID, but also the benefits of taking the vaccine. And so, again, I'm not here to tell people you have to take the vaccine, but what I do hope is that if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, please reach out to people to get your questions answered so that you're empowered with the information to make a choice that's right for you.
Thank you very much. So at this time, we're going to close out in prayer. We thank each and every one of you who have joined us, whether you're here in Boston or across the country or even across the world. We thank God for you, and we hope that you join us on Sunday and be expecting for more fireside chats as we have conversations that matter to our community. So as we close on this night, let us go to God in prayer. Most gracious and wise God, we thank you for this night. We thank you for Dr. Chidi, and we thank you for the expertise that he has brought to us about the COVID-19 vaccine. God, you know that we have experienced difficult times. But God, we do believe that even in difficulty, there is still hope for deliverance. And so, God, we are praying right now for each and every person that has experienced COVID-19, each and every family that has been hurt by this virus, whether through sickness or bereavement. God, we're praying for those who are dealing with the anxieties and the pressures, whether it be from family or for their jobs or from their community. And God, we hope that this night open their eyes so they might see, open their ears so they might hear, but more importantly, open their hearts so they might receive the revelation you have for them. God, we are praying right now for each and every doctor and scientist and nurse and frontline worker that is working on our behalf. God, we're praying that you continue to use them in their field for the ministries you've called them to. Because, God, we know that you use all of us for your glory. And so, God, we are praying that we get through this difficult season. God, we're praying that you give us all that we need so that we can be better together. And, God, we continue to build our hopes on that which is eternal and hold unto your unchanging hand. And so now unto you who is able to keep all of us from falling and present us faultless before your presence with exceeding great joy. To the only wise God, our Savior, be glory, honor, dominion, and power, both now, henceforth, and forevermore. We give you this night in this fireside chat. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Let every heart and mind say amen. God bless you all tonight. We thank God for you, and we pray that God continues to be with you, and we claim Christ over COVID. You have a blessed night tonight.